Hey everybody, you've got Ryan here over at Stealth. Today we're going to look at the Tarta Original. Getting into it, we're going to look at some of the features and components that make up the Tarta Original and what makes it so unique. We'll also talk about doing some adjustments and how to go about guessing the correct size for Tarta Original. Let's start by looking at some of the features that make Tarta unique. Tarta designed this backrest around a pretty unique design approach. They wanted to design something that allowed for freedom, both freedom of configuration and freedom of movement. They needed something to be innovative and simple to use while being flexible and adjustable all at the same time. They wanted it to be super comfortable with a unique design. It is an Italian backrest, so they wanted it to stand out among other backs in the industry, but still have all of that and be customizable. And that's the approach Tarta comes from. So, talking about flexibility, the main characteristic of the Tarta is flexibility and modularity. That gives this the possibility to move with the person, but also fit to the person, right? It also lets them move around and readjust and go about their activities while helping them to resume that original position. Flexibility also means that the Tarta Original is built around each individual client. Movement of the central spine can be introduced or restricted anywhere along that backrest as well. All of this should help to increase functional range of that end user. Adjustability wise, Tarta is extremely adjustable. You're able to modify its shape to capture the best configuration for each individual, and it'll adapt to both those easy, simple backrests where straight out of the box it works, or to something slightly crazy like you have on the screen here. Being able to modify the shape of the Tarta does mean you have some pretty unique growth capabilities offered in this backrest, as well as the ability to capture some pretty unique shapes and contours on that user's body. When talking about comfort, being able to shape this backrest to each individual and then put the pads they need in the places they need it makes it an extremely comfortable backrest. Just by the design alone, it also means this is an extremely breathable backrest as well. The pads themselves took a lot of effort to design. There weren't just random shapes thrown in there. They are contoured and structured so that they provide the best contact possible, and so that when you start curving them and shaping them, they minimize the wrinkles and hot spots that could be created. One of the design elements was being able to create a back that was unique in its appearance, and they have done that. So you get a pretty aesthetic backrest out of this system, but it also does a lot of unique things. It does capture the pelvis really well compared to a lot of other backs on the market. It does make a highly breathable backrest, and you have a lot of access to evaluate for pressure. So all of that breathability, those gaps between the pads and the ribs, means you have access to get your hands, your fingers in there and make sure contact is where contact needs to be. All of that means, hopefully, an expansion of the client's functional ADLs. Taken all together, all of this goes to mean that Tarta Original is an extremely customizable back. You get to capture shapes that typically are pretty challenging and apply it to many, many different situations, from easy to crazy difficult, right? Before anybody asks to, we don't color them like you see in the picture. It's going to be silver. Sorry. Okay, we're going to move on to looking at the actual components that make up your Tarta Original. When you look at a Tarta Original, it's really not that many components. It looks overwhelming, but it's not that many things. You've got some pads, you've got some ribs, you've got a column in the middle. So it's not that crazy overall. When you break it out, only a handful of components make up this whole backrest. They are just repeated from top to bottom. So your central plate, your vertebrae, and your carters make up the central spine, which we'll go over. Then you've got your ribs or your staves and some pads. That's about it. So when you start looking at the central column or the spine, your central plate is where a lot of the magic starts to actually happen in this backrest. So it's a harmonic steel plate that's 1 millimeter thick. So that lets it twist and bend and be shaped to different shapes other than a completely flat spine. The other fact that helps us do this is that those holes on that central plate are ovals and not just a simple through hole. That lets us start to expand that spine and start to curve that spine. So it does a lot of cool things for us. Your vertebrae are a fiberglass reinforced ABS. On the front side, contact side, you'll have some Velcro as well. When you put those pieces together, you get your central column or your spine. So that harmonic steel plate gives us a stable but a flexible base of support that we can start to expand and adapt to each unique situation. There is a rotational component to help accommodate for some spinal curvatures, and you can remove some pins out of here to start getting some more lateral rotation and deal with those more complex needs. So we'll talk about that pin in just a few minutes. When we're talking about staves or ribs, we have 18 different sizes to choose from here. They're going to be an aircraft grade aluminum, so they can be bent and shaped a couple of different times before they become brittle or weak. So these 18 different sizes make up our 4 different size backrests. So these 18 different sizes are going to make up our small, medium, large, or extra large backrests. They're each going to be labeled with a S1, for example, or M3, things like that, right next to the attachment holes. This will help us identify which ones they are if they're just loose, but each backrest is going to use a couple of different sizes per backrest. So once we add our central column and our ribs or staves together, we get basics of a backrest here. So this is our base. The only thing we have left from here is going to be aesthetics and some padding. Talking about that aesthetics and the padding, our pads themselves, we have 12 different sizes to choose from, and they're going to be an air mesh. They are only going to come in air mesh because that is how Tarta designs them and builds them. They're all molded and created together so that material is not interchangeable. The carders are going to be a PB Flex, and it's basically it's kind of a softer, more malleable plastic that won't shatter from pulling it on and off that central column. We've got 3 different types that we'll look at over the course of this, but basically what we have is one with a logo. The one we carry actually has the Tarta and a Stealth logo on it. You have one with no logo, and then you have one with 2 giant holes on either side of it. And that will be our 3 different versions. Alright, when we're talking about these 12 pads, there are a bunch of different shapes here. They're not random shapes. They actually do different things for that backrest. So if you're looking at your top row here in the picture, your 51, 52, and 62 would be your central column. So mix and match some way to fit that backrest, and that's your central column. 51 gets used outside of that as well, just kind of as a space filler. Your second row down and your third row down would be your lateral supports. So on your standard contour would be your second row, your 56, 57, and 58. Your deeper contours would get your 53, 54, and 55. And then when you move down to your bottom row, that's the one that starts to hug your hips. So that's more lower support, but still lateral support there. All of these pads just Velcro on, or each backrest is going to come with 12 T-nuts, so you can T-nut them in and have them fixed a little more permanently. They can be removed and machine washed as well. So once you add your pads and your carders to your ribs and central column, you get a backrest. That's all there is to it. So hopefully that makes it a little less overwhelming for you. Alright, moving along, we're going to look at the various mounting hardware options we have for the Tarta Original. As far as cane mounted hardwares would go, we've got a few different versions to look at. So Tarta Original can be applied to both rigid and foldable situations. We've got 2 fixed and 2 removable hardwares to look at here. So you've got a single point fixed and a single point adjustable. Those would both attach to your towel bars. And then a 2-point removable and a single point removable. And those would allow you to mount to, say, a folding chair or just in a situation when you need to have this backrest removable. So looking at the single point fixed, this is going to give you a clamp that clamps to your rigidizer bar. It's going to be able to clamp to anything from 3/4 to 1 inch, and you do have a small and a large version. Your small and your large, the only difference here is going to be a wider tension strap. And that tension strap is going to go above and help lock that backrest in place and keep it from rotating. Your rigidizer bars on these, you don't have much ability to play with depth, so you really need to make sure you're going about 2 inches deep on your rigidizer and not much more. If you go to that 4 inch deep rigidizer, you're going to have problems and you're not going to be able to mount very well. You do get your third style carder here with those two giant holes in the sides so you can bolt it directly to your center spine. Your single point adjustable is a very similar hardware. The only difference this time around is that you do have some height adjustability built into it. We do need a shallow rigidizer bar still, but you do have a little bit more play on how deep it can be on this one. There's a spacer plate we can add to this version. What you get here is a clamp that clamps onto your 3/4 to 1 inch rigidizer bar, which then goes onto a plate with multiple mounting locations, which then bolts to your backrest. So you still have your small and large version with your wider tension strap on your large being the only difference, but you do also get three inches of height adjustment here on this plate. What's nice here is that plate can be mounted anywhere along your backrest, and you can flip it and get a different 3 inches of height adjustability. So it doesn't always have to face down. You just make it fit your situation. So looking at your 2-point removable hardware, this would be more for your folding manual chair or situation you need to have a removable backrest. This is actually the hardware most people have their doubts about, but it's actually a pretty rock solid hardware that lets you do some pretty cool things with it. So again, you have a small and a large version. This time there is a difference between the two just because they are wider. It is a two-piece mounting clamp situation, so you get a Velcro strap with king clamps on it, and then you get a tension strap for the bottom side. So you mount the Velcro strap high with the king clamp strap high, hook onto it, and then you can start doing some cool things. So what you can do here is you can start to rotate those clamps side to side and affect rotation of the backrest. You can rotate them forward and it start to affect the angle of your backrest. And with that tension strap on the bottom side, you can start to affect your lumbar support and rigidize that as well. With no weight in this backrest, this mounting hardware appears loose and bounces around, but once you put weight in it, it stiffens up and it's really rock solid. The one thing I would caution is these hooks that go over the top strap need to be mounted all the way out or all the way in. If they're in the center of that snapping portion, it will slide side to side, and that's the one mistake a lot of people do end up making. But once you tighten everything down, lock it in place, this is pretty cool hardware here. What else is pretty cool is these two clips that bolt to your backrest could be used in assessments. So if you take this hardware for an assessment and somebody's already in an existing manual chair, say with a cloth backrest, you can use those two hooks to hook over that cloth backrest without removing it while you're fitting this Tarta. So it's pretty cool hardware, lets you do a lot of cool things with it. Your single point removable is the next one. It fits a 14 to 15 wide in the small version or a 16 to 18 wide in the large version. So it is a quick release. You flip the two levers on the sides there and the whole rigidizer bar pops up and out. Your single point adjustable in the center there, you still get to affect the angle of your backrest, and it fits the cane poles of 3/4 to 1 inch diameters. So this is kind of a 2-for-1 hardware. So if you're looking for a lot of adjustability, this gives it to you. So you have a height adjustable clamp that can be mounted anywhere along your backrest, but then you also have removable clamps that can clamp anywhere along your cane poles. So this really lets you put this backrest wherever you need it along that whole system. A big question I've been getting over the last couple of weeks is, can Tarta be mounted to a quantum power chair? The question is yes, in the near future. So with our Simple Solutions backrest interface, you'll be able to mount to a quantum chair fairly easily and gain some adjustability capabilities. So you can attach to your center spine, and it still allows those staves to remain flexible. You will still be able to shape that spine to the customer shape, so you don't have to be completely flat as well. And you start to get to affect depth, back rotation, back angle, back height, all of that independent of the Tarta or quantum adjustments that are already built in. So you get to do some pretty cool stuff here. And you maintain a quick release capability with minimal seat depth loss. So it's a pretty cool system. It works really well. I've mocked it up a couple of times now. So looking at it here, this is one I did in the office a while back. It mounts up pretty nicely. You can see I still have a nice curve to the backrest. I don't have a completely flat one. And it fits pretty well. It comes on and off pretty easy. So it's a pretty simple thing to do. Once this is released, the only thing you have to do to make it work on the Tarta is swap those big wings from left to right so the taller portion is in the center, and you're done. And we eat up about an inch of seat depth here is all I ate up overall when you start measuring it out. So pretty easy, pretty simple. We'll have a solution in the near future. Let's move on to adjustments though. This is probably the more important part of this presentation. So there are a lot of adjustments you can do with this Tarta Original. So you can start changing each vertebrae in about a 10-degree rotation. So that'll help you start to deal with a lot of scoliosis. The taller your back is, the more you can accommodate, right? Because you just have more angles you can achieve there. The inclination of each stave itself can be changed as well. So that's the rib, independent of the vertebrae, can be readjusted. And that aluminum allows you to bend the stave to the shape of the customer so you have that perfect fit. Since this backrest is so flexible, the customer can move around a little bit more naturally than they could in other backrests, but still have postural support. If you block the lower portion of this and lock it out, you start to build some strong lumbar support. And adjusting the padding will help provide different supports as well. So that's the shape of the pad, so put a new one in there, or change how it's angled. So you can do a lot of things with just moving pads around as well. So when we're talking central column adjustments, you can start to lock in curvatures and shapes with the central column. So once you want to lock something in and have no movement of the central spine, you're going to torque it down to about 25 Newton meters. So I know nobody's carrying around torque wrenches with them these days, so that's pretty tight. So what I've found the best way to lock in a shape for your spine is to start with everything semi-loose, where you can move it all, snug it up a little bit, shape it, snug it some more, shape it again, snug it more, and just go back and forth between shaping and tightening until you get that shape you're looking for. A more simple backrest might be easier to start with just the complete thing. If it's a pretty crazy backrest, start with just the spine itself. So that's kind of my trick that's worked out pretty well. So adjustments to your vertebrae, start letting this accommodate for those fixed or flexible asymmetric postures. We can start achieving pressure reduction by creating proper angles of support by shaping the spine, changing the angle of those vertebrae so we don't have anything digging into anybody. We do emulate molded options in the fact that it does capture some unique shapes. It's not gonna replace a mold at all. I almost hate saying mold in this. We don't support nearly like they do. We don't correct like they do. This is something that's going to help support the person, not correct them. If we look at this picture here, it does show you a little bit better how you can adjust the inclination or the angle of each vertebrae. So there are some pins. There's 4, 2 on top, 2 on bottom on each vertebrae right next to that central plate. If you push those out from the front side through to the back, they do pop out, and that's where you can start changing at 10-degree increments on either side on each one of your vertebrae. Going back to talking about our unique growth capabilities, one of the things that we get to do is affect total backrest height by compressing or expanding that spine. So you have about a 12 millimeter gap you can play with here between each vertebrae. So if you have a 4 tall vertebrae backrest, you've got quite a bit of room you can play already. And once you get up to your 6 tall, it gets to be pretty crazy how much you can compress and expand these backrests. So if you have a kid who you know is going to get taller before they get wider, you can start with a backrest that's compressed and just follow them for quite some time by just expanding a little bit at a time until you max it out. Adjustments to the staves are pretty straightforward. You've got the ability to only put the staves that are necessary. So if you have a rib hump or bony prominence you're trying to clear, you can go over or under, or just pull the rib off altogether and don't put one there. So it's more of an orthotic approach where you put that pressure that can be handled in the places that can handle it. So this is also how we can start to accommodate for some of those asymmetrical shapes. So we can bend it to shape, or we can put a smaller or larger ribs in the places that we need. So you can also remove a pin here, again from the front through the back, and start to change the angle of every single stave. And in this case, you have 122.5 degrees. Each stave can be adjusted. So you can go pretty crazy with the staves themselves. Talking about adjustments to the staves, we do have two standard models to choose from. We have a standard model or a contour model. So your contour is really where they started. That was really designed and inspired by racing seats. Where Tarta is located in Italy, they're not too far from some pretty cool automotive manufacturers. And those seats in those really high-end sports cars are what they used for the general shape and contour of that contour model. The standard is still semi-embracing, it's just not so aggressive. Pad install is pretty easy. They Velcro in place, or you can position it where you want it. Find a little slot in the back side of every pad, slice it, insert a T-nut. You get a super fancy T-nut insertion tool, which is just a little bolt, and you're good to lock it down with a bolt. So there's 12 of these in every backrest, so you do have the ability to lock down basically every pad. So when you get into an assessment or a fitting, there is a process that'll help you get through a little quicker. If you just try to get in there and start doing some crazy stuff, it's going to get out of hand pretty quick. But it does simplify it here. So Tarta Original, you can drop it over the existing back shell or the existing back fabric in many cases, so you don't have to remove theirs. But what I like to do is start with the correct height. Start there, find the correct height of your spine, and lock it in. Then lock in the shape of your spine. Once you've got your shape of your spine and the height correct, everything else tends to just fall in place. So you can start adjusting each stave, add or remove, shape them as you need it, and then attach it to the chair. Let them go about their way and see how it goes, right? So that seems to be the easiest process that I've found. That's actually how Tarta recommends it as well. In this case, if you have somebody that's pretty straightforward, again, start with that back straight out of a box, and that's pretty easy. Start with the whole thing. Or if they're going to be pretty crazy, like you have in this picture, it might be best to just start with a central column and find it from there, and then your ribs can be tacked on as you go. I do want to spend some time here talking about sizing of Tarta. It is kind of important to get your mind wrapped around who Tarta is actually for, and sizing is a big component. You've got 24 different sizes that you could define a Tarta in. You've got a 4, 5, or 6 tall in the vertebrae, and a small, medium, large, or extra large in your width. Each of those can come in a standard or a contour version. So one thing I like to point out here is the width sizing. We don't base it off of the size of the wheelchair. So if you have a 17 wide wheelchair, and I'm talking about a Tarta, I don't care what size your wheelchair is unless I'm talking about hardware. The backrest itself was sized in t-shirt sizes to help emphasize that we need it to be sized to the user and not to the user's chair. When you break all those 24 sizes out, this is what you're left with. So 12 standard, 12 contours. What Stealth is going to do is more of a back-in-a-box approach. So in general, we will have all of these standard configurations, and in the box, you'll get some parts to turn it into that deep contour version. So that limits it down to 12 standardized configurations, or you can order a custom configuration as well. So when I look at the sizing of the Tarta, if I look at height, 4 vertebrae tall is going to get me in the 8 or 9 inch range, while 6 tall is going to get me in between 12 and 14 tall. When I get over to the trunk width, I'm looking at 9 to 10 ish up to about 17 wide on the width. This was designed for active individuals in mind, and the weight capacity is only about 220 pounds here. Your backrest in total is only going to weigh a little under 2 pounds up to about 4 pounds depending on your configuration. So it is still on the lighter side in that sense. In our user manual, we do have this chart here that gives you a pretty good breakdown of how wide and how deep each rib is going to be. So you're not left guessing if you're trying to pick and pull some parts to build a back. So we've got this chart for your small, medium, large, and extra large, as you can see here. What's great about it is it does show you that they're all basically the same shape as far as your smalls, your mediums, your larges, and your extra larges. The big difference is how far they curve around or how deep they get. When we're talking pads here, we've got this same chart and user manual again, and it's just a pretty rough measurement to give you a good idea of how big a pad is. So if you know I have this hole that is X, Y, and Z big, this is a pad that could potentially fit in it, and you know which one to order. Alright, so your good news here is Tarta does have an E2617 code now. So this is your custom backrest code that we've been fighting for a few years now. If you order it as a standard, more back-in-the-box approach, we do offer it at a $1,300, $1,500, or $1,700 MSRP. Just depends on how tall you go. We do also now have a custom Tarta backrest order form, so that will affect your MSRP slightly differently as well. That's it on Tarta Original. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them our way. We'll get you some answers as quick as we can. Other than that, take it easy out there, guys.